My parents' 35th wedding anniversary was supposed to be the kind of night you remember for all the right reasons: laughter, warm speeches, and a celebration of the life they had built together. But in the middle of the party, my mother's oldest friend, Marjorie, leaned across the table and said something that stopped me cold. "I can't believe you've never been told the truth about your father." I blinked at her, thinking I must have misunderstood, but she leaned closer and added, "It's something your mother should have told you years ago." My smile faded instantly. Around us, the band kept playing and guests kept talking, but all I could hear were those words, echoing in my head. In that instant, I knew whatever she meant was going to change everything I thought I knew about my family. It was a warm spring evening in Connecticut, and the private event hall of the local country club had been transformed into something out of a magazine. White roses filled crystal vases on every table. Gold-rimmed glasses sparkled under the soft glow of chandeliers. At the front of the room, a long head table displayed framed photos from my parents' wedding day all the way through the decades, laughing vacations, birthday parties, family milestones. I sat at that head table between my brother, Caleb, and my mother, Helen, watching my father move from group to group, charming each guest like he always did. I was genuinely proud to be there, celebrating them. They had been my example of what a strong marriage looked like. My father, Michael, was admired in our town, quick to tell a joke, always the one to lend a hand when someone needed help. My mother was the quieter half of the pair, but she was elegant and gracious, making everyone feel welcome. Caleb was his usual laid-back self, leaning in to tell me a funny comment about Dad's suit and making me laugh between speeches. The atmosphere was joyful. The band played a mix of old love songs and light jazz. Waiters moved between tables with trays of champagne and plates of hors d'oeuvres. Guests swapped stories about my parents, teasing about how long they had lasted together, and marveling at how much they still seemed to enjoy each other's company. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have grown up in a home built on love and stability. When the toast began, Caleb stood first, telling a lighthearted story about Dad teaching him to drive, complete with near misses and Dad's mock outrage. The crowd laughed. My father shook his head with a grin, and my mother clapped proudly. My father's own speech followed, full of humor and affection, with a touching line about how my mother had saved him when they were young. Everyone clapped, glasses clinked, and I felt a warm wave of gratitude wash over me. At that moment, I had no idea that this perfect picture was about to crack. I didn't know that within an hour, a few quiet words from Marjorie would open a door to a truth my family had kept shut for decades. And once it opened, nothing would ever look the same again. The party was in full swing when the speeches wrapped up, and the band started playing a softer tune to let people mingle again. Guests moved around the room, some heading toward the bar, others stopping to admire the photo display of my parents' life together. I stayed at the head table for a few minutes, sipping my champagne and watching my father laugh with a group of his old college friends. He looked so at ease, so proud of the night. My mother was beside me, chatting politely with a couple from our neighborhood, her polite smile never faltering. That's when Marjorie walked over. She'd been my mother's best friend since they were both in high school. Bold, outspoken, the kind of woman who would tell you exactly what she thought, whether you wanted to hear it or not. She slid into the empty chair next to me and smiled, but it wasn't the warm, celebratory smile I expected. It was smaller, tighter, almost guarded. "I have to ask you something," she said, leaning slightly toward me so her voice wouldn't carry. I raised an eyebrow. "Okay." She studied my face for a moment, then asked, "Has your mother ever told you the real story about the year you were born?" I blinked, caught off guard. "The real story? What do you mean?" Before she could answer, my mother appeared, her hand resting lightly on the back of Marjorie's chair. "Marjorie," she said in a calm but firm tone, "don't start this tonight." Marjorie didn't back away. Helen, she's 32 years old. She's not a little girl anymore. She has a right to know. My mother's smile was still on her face, but I could see the tension in her jaw. Not here, she said sharply. I looked between them, feeling my pulse pick up. No what? What are you talking about? My mother's eyes met mine, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something I'd never noticed before, fear. But she quickly turned away, murmuring something about needing to check on the dessert table, and left. Marjorie leaned in again, her voice low and deliberate. There's a lot about your father you don't know, Grace. Things your mother chose not to tell you. My heart thudded in my chest. Like what? I pressed. She hesitated, glancing around the room, then shook her head. This isn't the place. The rest of the night, I couldn't stop watching my parents. Every time my father laughed, every time my mother glanced at him, I tried to read between the lines. What could possibly be so serious that my mother didn't even want it hinted at in public? Caleb noticed I was distracted and nudged me. What's wrong with you? He asked. I forced a smile. Nothing, just tired. But I could tell from the way he looked at me that he didn't believe me. When the cake was brought out, everyone gathered around for the traditional cutting. My parents stood side by side, smiling for the cameras, feeding each other a bite as everyone cheered. I clapped along, but my mind was elsewhere. The picture in front of me, happy couple, loving family, perfect marriage, suddenly felt like a stage set, and I couldn't shake the feeling that behind it was something I was never meant to see. Later, while people were dancing and the noise in the room was loud enough to cover our voices, I found Marjorie standing near the bar. Please, I said quietly, just tell me. I don't care if it's not the place. I can't sit here pretending everything's fine when clearly it's not. She looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing whether to speak. Before she could, my mother appeared again, her voice sharper this time. Marjorie, I'm asking you one last time. Stop. The air between them was tense enough that the bartender glanced up from pouring drinks. I turned to my mother. Why won't you just tell me? If there's something I need to know, then say it. I'm not a kid. My mother's eyes darted to my father across the room. He was laughing with two of his friends, oblivious to the tension brewing on the other side of the hall. She stepped closer to me, her voice low. This is not the time, Grace. Let's enjoy the night. Her words only made me more determined. Enjoy the night? After what Marjorie said, I can't. I'm not going to be able to think about anything else until I know. Marjorie set her drink down and gave me a look that was both apologetic and firm. If you really want to know, ask her when you get home. Ask her to tell you about the year after you were born. My stomach flipped. I wanted to push for more right then, but my mother's glare was enough to make Marjorie turn away. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I danced when asked, smiled when people took photos, even laughed at a few jokes. But my mind kept circling back to that one line. The year after you were born. What had happened in that year that was so important, so damaging, that it was never spoken about? And why did Marjorie seem so sure that I needed to hear it now? By the time the party began to wind down, I had made up my mind. Whatever it was, I was going to get the truth tonight. The ride home from the anniversary party felt like the longest drive of my life. Caleb had taken his own car, so it was just me in the back seat, watching my parents in the front. My father hummed along softly to a classic rock station, clearly in a good mood after the celebration. My mother stared out the window, silent, her hands folded in her lap. I kept my eyes on the back of her head, wondering if she knew I had already decided I wasn't letting the night end without answers. When we pulled into the driveway, my father unlocked the door and went inside first, calling out something about making a pot of coffee before bed. My mother lingered near the car, gathering her shawl around her shoulders, avoiding my eyes. I stepped closer, my voice low. We need to talk. She shook her head immediately. Not tonight, Grace. Yes, tonight, I said firmly. I've been thinking about it all evening. If what Marjorie said wasn't important, you would have laughed it off. But you didn't. You shut her down, and you've been avoiding it ever since. That tells me it's important. Her eyes flicked toward the house, like she was afraid my father might hear us through the walls. Please, she said quietly, just let it go. But I couldn't. I'm 32 years old, Mom. If there's something about Dad I should know, I deserve to know it. Whatever it is, I can handle it. She studied me for a moment, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she sighed and walked toward the back patio instead of going inside. I followed her, the cool night air making my skin prickle. The moonlight cast a pale glow over the wooden deck, and for a moment we just stood there, the sound of crickets filling the silence between us. Before I tell you, she began, her voice measured, you need to understand something. Families survive because we protect each other. Sometimes that means keeping things private, not because they're lies, but because they're too heavy to carry if you don't have to. I crossed my arms. I can't protect myself from something I don't even know exists. She nodded slightly, as if she had been expecting that answer, and then motioned for me to sit. I lowered myself into one of the deck chairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. She sat across from me, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. The year after you were born, she said slowly, was the hardest year of my life. I stayed quiet, giving her space to continue. She took a deep breath, her gaze drifting to the darkened trees at the edge of the yard. Your father wasn't here for most of it. He left, disappeared really, for almost a year, and when he came back, nothing was ever the same. I felt my breath catch. He left? Why? Her eyes returned to mine, and I saw a mix of pain and hesitation there. Because he was accused of something serious, and he couldn't face it here. He thought leaving would make it go away. My mind reeled. Accused of what? I asked, my voice sharper now. She hesitated, glancing again toward the house. It involved a woman he knew before me, a woman who... She stopped, swallowed hard, then looked away. She said he hurt her, badly. The police got involved, but she decided not to testify. Without her, the case fell apart. He came home, and we never spoke of it again. I sat back, stunned. And you stayed with him? After that? Her eyes softened, but her voice was steady. I stayed because I wanted you to have both parents. I told myself it was in the past, that it was just a misunderstanding, and maybe part of me believed that. But I also stayed because I wasn't ready to face what leaving would mean. For you, for me, for our lives. The words felt heavy, sitting in my chest like stones. The man I had looked up to my whole life suddenly felt like a stranger, and my mother, the person I trusted most, had been carrying this truth alone for over 3 decades. I leaned forward, my voice low. Why now? Why let Marjorie almost tell me tonight? Her gaze dropped to her hands. Because I'm tired, Grace. Tired of pretending. Marjorie has been pushing me for years to tell you, and I've always refused. But tonight, I saw the way you were looking at your father, so proud, so certain of who he is. And I thought, maybe you should know the truth, even if it changes how you see him. I felt my throat tighten. It does change how I see him, and it changes how I see you. She flinched slightly, but nodded. I know, and I'll accept that. But you needed to hear it from me before you heard it from someone else. I sat there, the night air cool against my skin, my mind tangled in questions I wasn't ready to ask. I didn't know if I was more hurt by what my father had done, or by the fact that my mother had hidden it for so long. But one thing was certain. This conversation had taken us past a point of no return. Inside, I could hear my father moving around in the kitchen, the clink of mugs on the counter. He had no idea what we had just talked about. And I realized that the hardest part was still ahead, because sooner or later, I was going to have to confront him. I sat on the patio for several minutes after my mother went back inside, staring at the dark yard, while the sound of clinking dishes and muffled movement came from the kitchen. My hands were cold, my stomach knotted, and my mind replayed her words again and again. He was accused of hurting a woman. The image I had of my father all my life had been that of a strong, moral man. Now that image felt fragile, as though the smallest touch would shatter it completely. When I finally walked into the kitchen, my father was at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He smiled when he saw me, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something guarded, like he already sensed I knew more than I should. "Want one?" he asked, holding up a mug. "No," I said, my voice flat. I didn't move toward the counter. I stayed by the doorway, gripping the frame. "We need to talk." His smile faded. He set the coffee pot down and leaned against the counter, his arms folding across his chest. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "Mom told me about the year after I was born, about why you left." His face didn't change much, but the slight tightening of his jaw told me I'd hit the nerve I expected. "And what exactly did she tell you?" he asked carefully. "That you were accused of hurting a woman," I said, my voice rising. "That you just left instead of facing it. That she stayed with you anyway." He exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping to the counter before meeting mine again. "So she finally decided to tell you." His tone wasn't remorseful. It was more like he was disappointed in her for breaking an agreement. I stepped closer, my voice sharp. "Is it true?" For a moment, he didn't speak. The kitchen felt smaller, the hum of the refrigerator loud in the silence. Then he said, "Yes, I was accused. But it wasn't true, Grace. It never happened the way she said it did." I clenched my fists. "The way who said it did? Mom? Or the woman?" "The woman," he replied. "Her name was Rachel. I knew her before I met your mother. We had a history, and when things ended, she didn't take it well. Years later, when your mother and I were together, she showed up again. She said I'd done something I didn't. I panicked. I thought the safest thing, for all of us, was for me to leave until it blew over." His words came out smooth, rehearsed even, but there was a hollowness in them that made my stomach twist. "You left Mom with a newborn and vanished for almost a year," I said, my voice shaking. "If you were innocent, why didn't you fight it? Why didn't you prove her wrong?" His eyes hardened. "Because, Grace, things like that don't just go away when you say you're innocent. Once people hear an accusation like that, it sticks. I didn't want you growing up in the middle of a scandal." "That sounds like you were protecting yourself," I shot back. "Not me." He didn't answer right away. He sipped his coffee, the casualness of it making my skin crawl. "Maybe it was both," he said finally. "Maybe I thought keeping you away from all that was worth the cost." I could feel my chest tightening, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Do you know what it's like to grow up thinking your father is a hero and then find out he walked away when things got hard? Do you know what that does to someone?" His expression softened slightly, but there was no apology in his voice. "I know you're angry, and maybe you have the right to be, but I've been here ever since, haven't I? I've been a good father to you." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "Being here now doesn't erase what you did then. It doesn't erase what Mom had to go through, or the fact that you never trusted me enough to tell me the truth yourself." From the doorway, my mother's voice broke the tension. "Grace." I turned to see her standing there, her face pale. She stepped into the kitchen slowly. "You have your answer now. It's up to you what you do with it." I looked between them, my father standing there, defensive but calm, my mother tired but resolute, and realized there was no version of this story where I would get perfect clarity. Maybe he was innocent. Maybe he wasn't, but either way, the man I thought I knew was gone. Without another word, I walked past them, up the stairs, and into my old bedroom. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and tried to steady my breathing. Downstairs, I could hear the faint murmur of their voices, low and tense. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like part of their family. I felt like an outsider looking in, seeing the cracks that had been there all along. And I knew that no matter what they said, no matter what explanations they gave, I would never see either of them the same way again. The next morning, I woke up in my old bedroom to the sound of birds outside the window and the faint clatter of dishes from downstairs. For a split second, it felt like any other visit home, like I was just a daughter waking up to the comfort of my parents' house. But then, last night's conversation came rushing back, and that brief moment of normalcy vanished. My chest tightened, the weight of what I had learned pressing down before I even got out of bed. When I finally went downstairs, my father was sitting at the kitchen table with the newspaper open, a cup of coffee in front of him. My mother stood at the stove, flipping pancakes. The scene looked almost picture perfect, but the air between them felt heavy, like there was an invisible barrier neither wanted to cross. My father glanced up at me, his eyes searching for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe understanding, but I gave him nothing. I just muttered, "Morning," and poured myself some coffee. We ate in silence. Caleb came in halfway through breakfast, cheerful and unaware, making small talk about the party and asking if anyone had seen his jacket. I watched my parents answer him with practiced smiles, their voices steady. It was strange, sitting there knowing that beneath those smiles was a history he didn't know about, a truth that could change the way he saw them forever. For now, I kept it to myself. This was my burden to carry, and I wasn't ready to share it yet. After breakfast, my father left to run an errand, and my mother started clearing the table. I stayed behind to help, stacking plates and rinsing them in the sink. The silence between us wasn't tense this time. It was complicated. Finally, I said, "I still don't know what to do with what you told me." She set down a plate and met my eyes. "You don't have to decide today or tomorrow. Just remember that your father is more than his worst mistake or his worst accusation. People are complicated." Her words sat with me, but I wasn't ready to agree. Complicated was one thing. Hiding something this big for decades was another. Still, I could see the toll it had taken on her. Years of carrying a secret. Years of pretending everything was perfect. It made me realize that my mother wasn't just the one who kept the truth from me. She was also the one who bore the weight of it alone. When I left later that afternoon, the drive back to my apartment felt different than it had coming here. The road was the same, the trees still blooming with the same early spring flowers, but I didn't feel like the same person. I kept replaying the party in my head, thinking about how easily we had all smiled for the cameras, how easily we had performed happiness. It made me wonder how many other families were holding their own carefully crafted images together, hoping no one looked too closely. That night, I sat in my apartment with my phone in my hand, debating whether to call Caleb. Part of me wanted to tell him everything, to have someone else share the weight of the truth. But another part of me feared what it would do to him. He had a different relationship with our father, one I didn't want to break unless I was sure it was necessary. In the end, I put the phone down. For now, this was my reality to process alone. Over the next week, I kept catching myself in moments of quiet reflection, remembering my childhood, all the times my father had been there for me, and wondering if those moments were enough to outweigh what I knew now. I started noticing little things I had never thought about before. The way my mother avoided certain topics when my father was around. The way he sometimes changed the subject abruptly. Looking back, I realized the signs had always been there. I just hadn't known how to see them. The truth didn't bring closure. It didn't feel like a puzzle piece clicking neatly into place. If anything, it left more questions than answers. I didn't know if my father had been falsely accused or if he had done something he would never admit. And maybe I never would. But I did know one thing. The blind trust I had in him was gone. One evening, about a month later, my father called me out of the blue. His voice was steady, almost casual, but there was something underneath it. "I know things are different now," he said. I don't expect you to see me the same way. But I hope you'll remember the years we had that were good. I didn't promise him I would. I just said, I'll remember everything. That's the thing about learning the truth. It doesn't just change how you see someone else. It changes how you see yourself, your past, and the foundation you thought your life was built on. I can't go back to seeing my father as a flawless man, but maybe that's okay. Maybe part of growing up is realizing that the people we love are just as flawed, complicated, and human as anyone else. I don't know if my relationship with my father will ever be what it was. I'm not sure I want it to be, but I do know this. I will never ignore my instincts again, and I will never let fear or comfort stop me from asking the hard questions. Because sometimes, the truth we avoid is the one that changes everything. And once you've heard it, there's no turning back.